I am delighted to introduce today our guest speaker. This is someone that I attended a little bit of ministerial school with. She's ahead of me, and I have a funny story to tell about her before I introduce her. Yeah, and she does. She probably didn't even know this. This is going to be new to her. When I first started ministerial school, Reverend Glenn and I started about the same time, and we went to our first retreat in that March of 2011. And at the retreat, the senior class always presents the Sunday morning service for us. And so Glenn and I are in the back row, deer in the headlights, right? It's like, oh my gosh, what to expect with everything that's happening here. And this senior class got up to do the service, and it was amazing, and we were just blown away. And then Catherine got up to deliver the message. And we both I get goosebumps thinking about it. It was like, I will never be able to do that. What am I doing here? So it was quite funny to have that experience, and I'm delighted to have you with us here today. And her, she comes from the Center for Spiritual Living in Carlsbad over in Southern California, and she speaks and teaches there regularly. Her professional life, she's worked in sales leadership, enablement, change management, and organizational design. After 38 years, she started when she was very, very, very young in the corporate environment. She recently started a consulting business called Catherine & Company, where she strives to bring the principles of religious science into the workplace and develop corporate culture and create work environments where people thrive because they feel valued and appreciated. Because of her work in this area, she's becoming known as the Minister of Happiness. I love that. Could you please join me in welcoming Reverend Catherine Bonin?
Thank you. Thank you. Well, good morning. It's wonderful to be with all of you today. So there's this couple, Mary and Joe, and they both just turned 60. And they have a lot of things to celebrate. They just had their birthdays, they're having their 40th wedding anniversary, and they're both getting ready to retire. So their kids decide to throw them a big party. And the party's a blast. They have a wonderful time. At the end of the party, though, a fairy shows up. And the fairy tells Mary and Joe she's going to give them their heart's desire, one wish. So the fairy looks at Mary and says, "What would you like, Mary?" And Mary says, "You know, I would like the vacation of a lifetime. I would like to sit on a warm beach and drink champagne." And poof, they're in the French Riviera. And so the fairy shows up at the French Riviera and says to Joe, "And Joe, what's your heart's desire?" And Joe thinks about it for a few minutes and he says, "I'd like a woman 30 years younger than me." And poof, he's 90. Now that might seem silly, but the truth is we can have our heart's desire. We can have anything that we want. This month in Centers for Spiritual Living all around the country, ministers are talking about the 4 basic principles of Science of Mind, the first 4 chapters of the Science of Mind textbook. Basically, it's everything you wanted to know about Science of Mind in 4 weeks. So the first week, I'll bet Jill talked about the thing itself, which is God, of course, what's everywhere and everything. Then the next week, probably she talked about the way it worked. And last week, what it does. Today, I'm going to talk about how we use it, how we practice these principles in our life every single day. And the cool thing is, we already use it. I want to start with going back to what you probably heard about last week, what it does. And I summarize this to my congregation with one word: yes. It says yes. Whatever you want, whatever you believe, whatever you focus on, it says yes. Always yes. Does anybody know the radio station in Los Angeles, KFI? It's a very big, popular talk radio station. And in 1949, Ernest Holmes had a show on that station. And it was called This Thing Called Life. And it was every Sunday morning at 7 o'clock. And he started it with his booming voice. And he said, "There's a power for good in the universe, and you can use it." And that show ran for 7 years on KFI. We liken that power to electricity. Because like electricity provides heat and light and power for the tools that we use, it's always here and it's always available. This power within us is always here. and it's always available. One thing that's the same is it has to be directed, right? It has to be directed and it has to be connected. And we need to be able to channel that power within us just like we channel electricity so it can be of value to us. In electric world, it's personalized through things like a space heater and a toaster and a computer. In our life, it's personalized through our relationships, our relationship with money, our work environment, our family, those kinds of things. And when the lights don't work in our house, we know that it's not a lack of power, right? There's something wrong with the circuitry. Same thing in our lives. I want to talk a little bit about light. Do you know that every religion and every spiritual philosophy in the world uses the word love as a synonym for God? They also recognize that within every one of us, there is a light. And that light is called something different. But the truth is, we don't care what it's called, right? What we care about is that we know it on a personal level, that we have an intimate relationship with that. In Christianity, it's called the light of the Holy Spirit. The Buddhists strive to have an enlightened mind. And when they get that Buddha mind, it's said that they have entered the realm of pure light. In Hinduism, there are two words, Atman and Brahman, and those words are described as the light of pure consciousness. And the Bhagavad Gita tells us that Brahman is the light of all lights. And that's the truth of us, that light that lives inside of us. In Judaism, light is equated to wisdom. And the Jews call God the light of Israel. Islam, ultimate light, is one of the 99 names for God. I remember praying and asking that spirit within me to remind me and show me when I'm veering off the path and when I start walking down dark alleys. And here's what I got. Do you remember the show from the early 80s called Fantasy Island? Mr. Rourke was like the mayor or the king of the island, right? He granted all those wishes for everyone. Then there was this little guy, he might even have been littler than that, tattoo. And he had one job. And his job was to run all around saying, the plane, right? Letting everybody know that the plane was coming. And when I asked that light within me to show me when I was turning and walking down those dark alleys and forgetting, what I heard and what I saw was that little guy running around, and I heard the light. And I still to this day have that in my consciousness. It comes up for me when I notice that I'm starting to veer down into those dark alleys. I bet you have something that you do, and I hope today that I'll be able to give you some more tools that will help you not venture down into that alley, to stop and either back up or turn around and remember the light. Because it's beneficial when we use it and when we know how to use it, when we direct it, just like we direct electricity. Ernest Holmes says, the power is within us to create the life we want. We are the channel for God's good to be personalized. And in the Bible, Psalms 119, verse 105, it says, the word is a lamp for my feet, a light for my pathway. Let's talk about that a minute. We're made in the image and likeness of God. The same creative power that God has is in that spark within each one of us. And this passage isn't just about the words that we speak, and it's not just about the words in the Bible. It's about what's behind the words, the feelings and the beliefs, the thoughts that we have, that we think every day. Those are so much more powerful than the words we actually speak. And that's what's behind the word. That's where the power is. And the idea of feet and path, well, that's a metaphor for the journey of life. So I'm going to say that passage again, and I want you to remember that the words really mean the feelings and the beliefs that we have that are behind the words, and feet and path is about our journey. The word is a lamp for my feet, a light for my pathway. We are like that lamp. Divine good shines through us all the time. The big difference between us and a lamp, though, is a lamp can't do anything about its situation. It has no individualized intelligence, no self-awareness of any kind. But we do. Our thoughts, our words, our feelings, they have great power, but we need to be able to use that power. So there's a salesman, a door-to-door salesman, who goes to a house in Tennessee, knocks on the door, and the woman answers the door, and he says, "Ma'am, I have something that's going to change your life." She says, "Really?" He says, "Yeah," and he looks around, he says, "You see that pile of dirt right there? I have this magnificent vacuum cleaner. It's a machine that will absolutely revolutionize your life. I will pick up that pile of dirt and dust balls and bugs in 2 seconds flat, or I'll eat it." And the woman says, "Well, you better get out your knife and fork because we don't have any electricity out here." So you got to be connected, right? Like electricity, a house can be wired, but if there's no fixtures, it's no good. Lamps without electricity cast no light. Electricity without lamps casts no light. But together, they illuminate the world. We need to connect to that unchanging truth within us, because the power is in that connection. We have to remember the light and create the container for that light and allow God to fill it. The law, like electricity, flows where it's directed. And one thing that I love is that we have the ability to self-correct and self-connect. A lamp can't do that. When we start going down those dark alleys, and we all do, right? We can stop and correct our path and connect in a split second by remembering the light. The light. Now, we know that our thoughts are things, and that's one of the primary principles that we teach in Science of Mind, and that's a good thing and it's a bad thing. It's a good thing because we can have anything we want. It's a bad thing, though, because sometimes we don't think we want what we necessarily get. I'm guilty of this, and I'll make a confession. Sometimes I get pissy. Am I the only one? The key is to recognize when we go there, when we start going down that alley, and turn around, recognize and see the light. The key for me is to not let what somebody says or does make me have a bad day. And do you know that the number one use of this principle, that our thoughts are things and that we're creative, is negative? It's worry. Think about it. I said that God always says yes. If you say, "I'm broke," God says yes. And if you say, "My life is filled with love and joy," God says yes. Whatever you believe, God says yes, but you have to believe it. When Reverend Joe was talking about living in the bloom, it's that end result, it's that end product, what you really believe you can have, and to live from that place of having it. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. I want to talk a little bit about the negative, the bad, for just a minute so we recognize it. Because when we worry, we have an emotional charge, don't we? We get caught up in all the what ifs. And there's a concept called what if down. And think about it, it's exactly what it sounds like. When you what if and you create all those negative scenarios, you're pulling yourself down, you're pulling your thoughts down, and you're creating what? Exactly what you're worried about. And unfortunately, when we worry, we just create more to worry about. Worry eats us up inside, and it keeps us separate from God. It keeps us from seeing that light and being the best expression of God that we can be. I'm a scuba diver, so I can't ever do a talk without sharing something about the ocean. In the Bay of Naples in Italy, there is a jellyfish called the Medusa jellyfish. And divers talk about this jellyfish all over the world because there's something really interesting about it. It gets to be pretty big, and it eats everything. And of course, jellyfish are translucent, right? So if you look at this jellyfish, you might see a boot inside it. You might see a key or a coin inside it. It eats everything. In addition to stuff that it can't digest, it also eats all kinds of sea life, which it can digest. Now, in this Bay of Naples, there are a lot of snails. And the snail's shell is hard, like that boot or that coin, and the jellyfish can't digest the shell of the snail. So the snail attaches itself to the inside of the jellyfish, and it starts to eat. And it gnaws away at that jellyfish, and guess what it does? It eats it from the inside out. It's a little like worry, isn't it? It is. Rumi says, "O soul, you worry too much. You've seen your own strength. You've seen your own beauty. You have seen your golden wings. Why do you worry? You are in truth the soul of the soul of the soul." Isn't that beautiful? So, we have to stop worrying, right? Y'all remember Bob Newhart, the Bob Newhart show? There is a scene in that show that I will never, ever forget. Bob Newhart's sitting in his office, and a woman comes into his office, and he's washing his hands, and he says, "I'll be with you in just a minute." And she sits down, and he turns around, and he says, "Hi." And she says, "Yeah, I'm referred to you by Jane." And he says, "Oh, yeah, you're the woman who's afraid you're going to be buried alive in a box, right?" And she says, "Yeah." He says, "Why do you think you're going to be buried alive in a box?" She says, "I don't know. I just am afraid of that." He says, "Well, before we get too far into it, I'll tell you I charge $5 for 5 minutes and nothing else. I don't make change, and it's cash only." She says, "Okay, what if it takes longer than 5 minutes?" He said, "Just $5, nothing else, but it won't take longer. We can usually get to the bottom of your problem in just a couple of minutes." So she snickers a little bit and sits back, and he says, "Now, go." She says, "Go what?" He says, "Why are you afraid to be buried alive in a box?" She says, "I don't know, but I've always been afraid of this." And he sits back and listens. He says, "Have you ever been buried alive in a box?" She says, "No." So he says, "Okay, I have 3 words for you. You ready?" She says, "Yeah." "Should I write it down?" He says, "No, you don't need to write it down. It's just 3 words. Most people can remember it." So he leans forward and he says, "Stop it! Just stop it!" And she says, "What? Just stop it. You're not going to be buried alive in a box. Just stop it. Every time you think of it, just stop it." And she says, "I can't just stop it. This is my greatest fear." And he says, "All right, I got 10 words for you. Stop it or I'll bury you alive in a box." So this talk today is about remembering to remember that light. And when you start going down that dark alley, just stop it. See, the seed of worry sprouts up in all kinds of places in our life. We need to just stop it when we see that sprout. We have to remember the truth. We have to remember the light, that spark of God that lives in every one of us. And it gets easier the more we practice. Anybody have a yoga practice? It's not called yoga perfect, is it? It's called yoga practice because we have to do it over and over and over again. And the more you do it, the better you get, right? But still always going to be a yoga practice. Spiritual practice is like that. It's not perfect. Life isn't perfect in that sense, in terms of the human level. But the more we practice, the easier it gets. The less time we spend in those dark alleys, right? We build that muscle just like we do when we exercise, just like we do when we practice yoga. We build that muscle, and it's easier the next time and the next time. Ernest Holmes says, one of the great difficulties in the new order of thought is that we're likely to indulge in too much theory and not enough practice. Practice helps us to remember. It helps us to claim our inheritance, to remember that creative nature of God that is the same, that is what is within us, that creative nature within each of us. In the movie, The Empire Strikes Back, Luke Skywalker lands on the swamp planet. He's looking for Yoda, right? Because he wants to become a Jedi warrior. He wants to defeat Darth Vader. He finds Yoda, and he asks Yoda to teach him the skills of the Jedi warrior. And Yoda's reluctant. But finally, Luke talks him into it. And Yoda starts by teaching him how to lift small rocks with his mind. Then they go to some bigger rocks. And once he's got that mastered, Yoda says to him, okay, now lift the starship out of the swamp where you crashed it when you landed. And Luke says, I can't do that. And Yoda says, you can do anything you set your mind to do. And Luke says, I'll try. And Yoda says, okay, try. Luke closes his eyes and focuses attention, and of course he fails. Why? Because inherent in the word try is doubt, isn't it? Permission to fail. So let's just get rid of that word in our vocabulary completely. Yoda, in fact, tells Luke, do or do not, don't try. Well, when Yoda focuses his attention on lifting that starship, he does. And Luke says, I don't believe it. And what does Yoda say? Exactly. Whenever that voice of doubt surfaces, we have to look at what we really believe. Not just what we're saying, what we really believe. If you're a musician and you want to play Carnegie Hall, but you've never played in front of people, you're not going to start by imagining Carnegie Hall, because probably there's a little small voice inside you that says, yeah, right. Right? You probably don't completely believe it. But do you believe that maybe you could play piano on a Sunday after church at Christmas time and have everybody singing Christmas carols? Or in your living room at a party, or maybe at the piano bar down the street? So we start with something that we know we can do. We start with something that we know we can imagine and feel and experience, because the mind knows no difference between imagination and reality. And so when we focus on what it feels like to have and do those things that we want to experience, we draw them into our lives. That's using this principle. We're building muscle. I love that Reverend Jill is doing that workshop on focusing on the bloom, living in the bloom, because that's called a spiritual prototype. And that's how we use this philosophy to create exactly what we want in our lives. The science of mind symbol is often equated to a seed, a soil, and a plant. You plant a seed into the soil, you water and nurture that soil, and it becomes a beautiful plant. It's exactly what happens with our thoughts. And when you plant a carrot seed, you get a carrot. You don't get a rutabaga or an apple. You get a carrot. So what you're planting in that garden of your mind is what you create. And just like electricity, when you flip the switch on, you know that the lights are going to come on, right? So when you have a thought like that and you imagine playing Carnegie Hall or whatever it is you want to experience, once you believe that it's possible and you can feel what it feels like to have that and live in that experience, you're drawing it to you because God is saying yes. So let's make watching our thoughts the spiritual practice for this week. Let's build faith by paying attention to our thoughts. The Buddhists call consciousness paying attention to what we're paying attention to. Think about that. Paying attention to what we're paying attention to. Watching our thoughts, noticing our thoughts, because if we can control and have dominion over our thoughts, we can have dominion over our lives. It's all about consciousness. So you already have some tools in your spiritual toolbox. You have prayer and meditation and visioning and spiritual mind treatment, and you have the spiritual prototype, wonderful music that connects you, right? Reading sometimes will connect you. It plugs you in. There's all kinds of great things you can do to be connected. And I hope that some of these images today are other ways that you can remember to be connected, so that when you start down that dark alley, you can stop and remember the light, the light. Because how we use it is by paying attention to our thoughts. And so that you can remember that, I have for every one of you a little flashlight to go on your keychain to remember the light. The light. Thank you. So let's pray, huh? So as I close my eyes, I recognize that light. I feel it and I know it. That infinite power of love, spark of the Holy Spirit, that light that God is, that lives in me and lives in everyone. How great it is to feel that warmth and to feel that love, and to know that each of us is connected like a golden cord to the one, or like a sunbeam to the sun. So from this place of unity, I know for each person here that remembering the light becomes easier. Using this idea to stop as we venture down those dark alleys, turn around and move towards the light is a spiritual practice that works effectively in everyone's life. And I know that as each one practices, it becomes easier, and we create the world that we want to create. I know that from this place, poverty can be eliminated, hunger can be eliminated, war can be eliminated. For I know that in the mind of God, those things don't exist. I know the light heals all. And so I live in that place of light, and I celebrate it. And I'm grateful to have this relationship that I have with it, and I know for each one here that that wonderful relationship they have with Spirit within is a cornerstone in their lives. And that from it, wonderful things are created. A life is manifest that is beautiful, filled with joy, filled with love, filled with harmony, filled with every desire of their heart. So grateful for this teaching and these principles. So grateful to see the many, many demonstrations in my life and in the lives of people around me. I give great thanks. I celebrate it. And my heart is just overflowing with appreciation. And so knowing this is how it is, it can't be any other way. The law always says yes. I release my word, I call it good, because I know that it is. And so it is.